Okay, so this build was a little bit of a challenge build, and these are the materials that we started with. Just some Magic the Gathering fat pack boxes and a piece of a shelving unit. To make the structure itself, I went ahead and I used the tops of the Magic the Gathering fat pack boxes and I glued them into a bottom. And using some chipboard, we are going to go ahead and just cover up some of those big gaps. Then using some air dry clay and a stone texture roller, I'm going to make the stone work for the outside. I have two different stone texture rollers, and I used one for big sections, and I used the smaller one and just some PVA glue on all of this to secure it into place, and the smaller ones I broke up into little pieces to fill in the gaps made by the bigger ones. You'll see me go ahead and fill those in here in just a sec. To paint these, we're going to use a light gray as well as a little bit of a black as a base coat, and then using some oil paints, we're going to make a mixture of black and dark gray to give an oil wash to the whole of the project. We're going to water this down with a little bit of mineral spirits and linseed oil, just to kind of help with that drying time. And it looks really dark now, but what we're going to do next is we're going to take a sponge soaked in some mineral spirits, and we're going to wipe away all of the paint that we don't want. And reveal that base coat underneath there, just like this. And I would highly recommend wearing a glove for this. I did not. And this stuff was everywhere when I was done. So I would highly recommend wearing a glove when you're using this technique. And then once that's done, we're going to give it a dry brush of an off-white. Now for one side of this, I didn't want to do the stonework. I kind of ran out of clay, so I wanted to make some planks. I did that just by cutting some spare strips of chipboard down and cutting them down to random lengths and gluing them onto the side with just some PVA glue again. For me, the random material that I got for this project was a spare bit of shelving from an old store. What I did was I cleaned it up a little bit and I cut it down into smaller pieces, and I figured this would be really sturdy material to make legs for the structure. I wanted this to be like a traveling wizard's study, so using some hot glue and some tin foil, I went ahead and I'm not a really great sculptor, but I've seen a lot of people use tinfoil at the base of their build, so I was like, okay, let's go ahead and try this. And then just using some clay, I kind of molded foot-like shapes onto them, and I think I did a pretty good job considering I've never really sculpted anything out of clay. It was a lot of fun to try and make something that wasn't a texture roller, and I didn't think that they looked particularly foot-like, so I wanted to make them just fleshy stubs. So I used some barbarian flesh, a Gulliman flesh wash, and then a dry brush of Helium green to give it kind of a almost dead flesh look. Now the fat packs come with these inserts that are the perfect size for this, and I decided to make a table out of one, so I cut it down to 2 inches wide and some strips of cereal box to give it a little bit of detail to the table. And then I added a silver paint and a orange dry brush paint. I think I also added a wash set, but I didn't record it. But for the bookshelves, I went ahead and I used the inserts from the box, and again, you can see off to the side that folded piece of cardboard that comes with it. I cut it down into strips, and we're just going to glue it in there to make some shelves. And then use some black Mod Podge mixed with a little bit more water than normal to try and seal up and toughen up the whole project. And I made 3 different bookcases for this build, and I painted them different shades of brown, so just whatever's floating your boat, whatever you think looks good for whatever project you're making. You hit them with I used a dark brown on this one, and then I used 2 different shades of brown on the other ones. But all of them I went ahead and I used a Tyrant Skull dry brush, which is just an off-white, to kind of give a little bit of differentiation in color. And that will be our bookcases. For one of them, I wanted to do a little cabinet or a little door. So I cut down another one of these inserts and folded it on top of itself on the outside of the project, just like this. So it kind of acts like a little bit of a door. And here you can see that dry brush. My recording lights are a little bit bright, so it's hard to see the difference, but I just did this until I liked the way it looked. Now for the scrolls, I cut some paper down into 1 inch by 1 inch squares and just soaked them in some Nescafe coffee. And this will be all the scrolls for the build. And it's really easy to do. I didn't try and do these very precisely, and I just kind of wanted a variety of sizes. But once they're soaked and they dry a little bit, we're going to roll them up on themselves. I tend to use the tweezers for this to roll them around, makes it a little bit easier, and just a little tiny dot of super glue. And then you can tear off the edges of them to make them look a little bit more riffled. But I just was blasting through these. I made a few dozen for this project, and it didn't take very long at all. Now, I also wanted some books to go in the bookcases. So to do that, I used just some spare chipboard as well as some spare balsa wood, and just cut down a bunch of different sized squares to make the insides of the books out of. The balsa wood, I didn't feel like cutting with a knife, so I went ahead and I got the shears out for this. And then to make the actual covers, we're just going to go back to that cereal box that we did the puzzles on earlier and just cut a strip of it, and then cut it down with an X-Acto knife. And what you're going to do is you're just going to fold the book over inside and then cut off the excess and just kind of move down the line. I found this was a little bit easier than trying to cut them all precisely. Just kind of get them in there and then take some scissors and cut off the excess. You aren't going to see the backs of the books in this project, so it's not as big of a deal. And then to secure them together, I went ahead and I just used some PVA glue. Now, to actually paint these, I wanted this to look very bright and colorful, so I picked a bunch of different bright colors and I gave them all a base coat in these base colors. And then I went through with some paint markers and I added as much detail as I felt I wanted to on each of them. So I just added some random symbols and stuff on them, and these paint markers are great. I picked them up online for just a few bucks. These are, I think, a metallic set of them, so they're very, very well pigmented, and you can just go to town. You can make this as detailed or as simple as you wanted. A lot of them I just did the spines on them because they'd be, you know, slotted into the shelves, but some of them I wanted to sit out, so I did little symbols and such on them. And just, we're gonna put everything in with hot glue. This isn't something that I'm going to be messing around with or playing with on the table. It's just gonna sit up on a shelf. So hot glue is perfectly fine to secure everything in here. I think I even used hot glue for the legs as well because it's just gonna sit. It's not gonna be played with at all. This was a fun build. I had a lot of fun challenging myself to only use a couple of basic materials on this build. There's already some things I would do differently, but I wanted to start moving on to my next projects because this one kept holding me up, but it was a lot of fun. Let me know if in the future you guys have any ideas for things that you want me to make. This was a little bit of a fun project I did on the side with a couple of buddies of mine to try and challenge ourselves, but thank you so much for watching.